first one I'm going to show you is the stem stitch. So you always want to start at the edge, so not in the middle of a branch, say, but at the very beginning. And you pull your needle up, and I'm going to take an 1/8, go back a 1/16. I'm always going to carry my thread on the same side. So in this case, I'm going to carry it up. Now I'm going to go an 1/8, and I'm going to come up right in that same hole. And we just continue that on. On this particular design, the pattern is traced like this. That's the pattern that's in the book. And the directions say that that is to be filled in with a fishbone stitch, which looks something like this. It's a really pretty stitch. I like that a lot. However, since this is going to be a lot more delicate looking, I'm just going to do a stem stitch around the outline. I'll show you how to do a fishbone stitch a little bit later though. So since I'm doing that, I can just continue that branch right up through the center of the leaf. And then once I get to the end, I can go down one side of the leaf and then up the next side of the leaf. If you're trying to turn like a sharp corner, there's several different ways to do it. One way is to come up around the corner, an 1/8 of an inch, go back in that same hole, and then we're going to just take an 1/18 or a 1/16. So basically like we did at the very beginning. Now I'm going to turn my fabric around and I'm ready to go this direction. That works pretty slick when you need to go around a corner, like for a square or a leaf like this. I'll do that again, going this on the other direction of this leaf, since it's pretty sharp little turn there. So I'm going to go an 1/8 of an inch, back in that same hole. It's kind of like a back stitch a little bit, and then halfway in between, so a 1/16, turn my fabric around. And now I'm ready to go this direction. When you're going around a curve like this, always carry your thread on the outside of the curve. So since this leaf is shaped that way, I am carrying my thread on that side of the line. Because this fabric is fairly light, I don't want to travel too far on the back with my thread, and I don't necessarily want to make a lot of knots. So if I have the opportunity, I'm just going to thread the ends of my thread right through some previous stitches. Although I do start with a knot frequently. So what I do is I lay the needle and the thread parallel to each other, and then I hold on at the needle side, wrap it around. Since this is one strand, I'm going to do it 4 times. And then pinch that wrap lightly. And then pull it through, keep pinching. And then at the very end, you're going to have a nice little knot. It's just a handy way to make a knot. So we did the stem stitch. Now that is exactly the kind of stitch we're going to do around the applique pieces. The only difference is going to be the way you carry your thread. So normally, since this is curved out, you would carry your thread on the outside. But what I recommend doing is carrying your thread on the inside, or carrying your thread on the side of the applique. This causes the thread to just fall in a tiny, tiny bit, and it kind of helps hold the applique in place. I'm only stitching through the background fabric. I'm not stitching through the applique. This isn't going to be washed or used, so it shouldn't come undone. If it does, I can press it back a little bit, but generally it should stay in place. Okay, so I'll just continue going around this little nest and finish up these stem stitches. One of the stitches I wanted to show you is the satin stitch. And the satin stitch is used on some berries and also on this little part of this flower. And a little trick that I do is I fill that area in with a Sharpie. And that way, if my stitches aren't perfectly lined up, I don't see the color of the fabric. I just see this black, and it makes it look much neater and nicer than it is. Now, I would suggest using 2 strands of floss for this satin stitch as opposed to the 1 strand. And even when you're using 2 strands, you want to just go ahead and separate both of those strands. So you're going to just kind of tap it to get the ends showing, and then pinch and pull. There's 1 strand. And then I'm going to pinch and pull the other strand. So now I have 2. This is very helpful anytime you're stitching with multiple strands because it keeps it from twisting so much when you're stitching. And another thing I wanted to show you was if you pinch it so that there's just a little dot showing, and then you put your needle right over that dot and push it through, that's a pretty easy way to thread your needle too. Okay, so what I would suggest is starting at the largest point of this. So I'm going to start at the top of this petal flower base. And it is helpful if this is a little bit bigger. I would probably put it in a hoop. Sometimes with satin stitches or fishbone or something where it's very dense, it is helpful to have it in a hoop. So I'll just take it all the way across to this side. And then I'm going to come up right next to where I began. And we just continue that. And you can see how it really is helpful having that black underneath. And part of this is just practice. So if you're kind of frustrated with your stitches, just be gentle with yourself and just keep trying, and eventually they get better and better. And mine are never perfect, but I think they look just fine. So there's the base of the flower. Just like that. So the other part of this little bunny image are the petals that go with this flower. These are long, skinny petals, and how I make those is just a very long fly stitch. So I'm going to start at the base of the flower. My thread is going to basically take the shape of that petal. I'm going to come down on the other side of the petal and then bring my needle up at the tip of the petal with the thread under the needle. And I don't want to pull it too tight. And then I put the needle down right on the other side of that loop of thread to hold it in place. Now I'm ready to make the next little petal. So it's actually a pretty easy stitch, but it's a fun way to make petals, and I use it for bees' wings sometimes if I'm making really tiny bees. It's a nice way to make wings and anything that would be too difficult to actually do a stem stitch that small. So you don't want to pull it too tight because since it is such a large space, you could actually kind of gather the fabric. So just make sure you have a little bit of tension, but not pulled too tightly. I'm going to kind of make this one end up there. So it looks like he's kind of coming behind that other petal. And then one more petal, and this guy will be done. Maybe this will come up a little higher on that side too. There. It's a cute little flower. Okay, so another thing about this, the applique piece, if you can see here on his tail, is the piece of fabric is just cut round for his bum, but I didn't stitch the stem stitch all the way around that part. I just did these little straight stitches to kind of make it look like a foofy tail. This little birdhouse with the bird and the fence, this one has some cherries and the opening to the birdhouse. Those, just like I did on the flower base, I'm going to satin stitch those, and so I went ahead and filled that in with black. If you're not looking too close, it almost looks like it's done. So if you wanted to cheat, you could just call it good right there. I'm going to start on one side of the berry, and you don't want to start as small of a stitch as you'd think. You're going to make it, and because you can always add on another stitch if you feel it needs it. But I'm going to go right there. So same thing, we're just going to keep our stitches nice and close together. Again, if you choose to, you could use a hoop with this just so it doesn't pull the stitches too tight and kind of gather the fabric, or you can just be really careful when you're pulling your stitches up. This cherry is almost done. Okay. There's a little cherry. This little acorn block has several different stitches in it that I can show you. So I went ahead and did the stem stitch. All the solid lines are stem stitched. And on this side, I went ahead and did these little lazy daisy stitches. So I'll show you that on this side. The lazy daisy stitch, you start at the base, so at the stem, and you're going to loop your thread around, take your needle right in the same spot where you started, come up at the tip of the loop with the needle or thread under the needle and pull, and then you're going to tack that loop in place. I'm going to go up one side and down the other, but you could go back and forth or whatever works for you. I usually go back and forth, but then I'm turning my fabric back and forth, and I didn't want to, I thought that might be kind of hard for you to follow in a video. So, all right, so that's how you do a little lazy daisy stitch. And these are done in the little flowers and like the little daisy flowers. And they're also done, I'll show you how here in this one, the bird bath. So these are the little lazy daisies to make a daisy flower, and they're the little droplets of water coming out of the bath. Those are lazy daisy stitches also. And on this house, it's the same thing, a stem stitch with these little lazy daisies going across. And then inside the heart are just little running stitches. So a running stitch is kind of like a, you know, a quilting stitch, just up, down, up, down. Another stitch on this acorn block is the French knot. So the French knot are these little dots. So everywhere there's a single little dot on your pattern, it's a French knot. So I'm going to wrap, since it's a single strand, I'm going to wrap it 4 times. That's way more than I usually wrap. So you're going to wrap it, put your finger on the needle where the wraps are, so you kind of hold them in place. You don't hold it too tight, but you want those wraps to stay in place. And then I'm going to put the needle down just a few threads away from where it came up. Then I pull on this end and slide those loops down so they touch the fabric. I don't pull it too tight because I have to pull the needle through. Now I'm going to put my finger on the back and my thumb on the front to hold that in place. Reach underneath and pull my needle. And there's a little French knot. That one's kind of big and loopy. Let's see if I can do one a little better than that. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, pinch, needle down, pull a little snug, hold it in place, pull the needle through. That one's much better. And then once you get the hang of it, you can just skip to the next one. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. Put the needle down, and then I'm going to go ahead and bring my needle up where the next dot is. So I can just jump to the next dot. And actually I'm using a fabric that has little dots on it, so there might be more French knots on this than are in the pattern, but that's okay. And since these are so close together, I have no problem just jumping around on the back a little bit, carrying my threads from one knot to the next. You don't need to knot between each one. There, those are those little knots. The cap of the acorn is filled in using fly stitches. So fly stitches are the same stitch we used at the top of the flower for the little bunny. So you're going to start at the widest point. You're going to carry the thread the same direction as the loop. And then your needle goes at the top of the loop and down. We'll skip over and do the next little nugget. And this is just a kind of a fun, quick way to give that cap a little texture like it does in nature. I love acorns, I always have. There's just something about acorns and also grape hyacinth. Just reminds me of like little tiny miniature fairylands or something. Okay, I'll finish up this cap and then we'll move on to the next stitch. Now to give the acorn nut a little bit of texture, I'm going to do some back stitches. So at a back stitch, you want to start at the very end. And I'm going to take about 1/8 of an inch, come up about 1/8 of an inch. So basically it starts almost like a running stitch. But now I'm going to go back, hence the back stitch, and go in the same hole as that first stitch. And I'm going to come up 1/8 of an inch on the other side of where my thread came up. And many people prefer to use a back stitch to the stem stitch. It gives a little bit of a finer line. It just kind of depends on what you feel most comfortable using. Okay, now we'll come up and do this side. And this just forms nice thin lines. Because you know sometimes acorns have kind of like a little grooves in the nut part of them. That's supposed to replicate this. All right, so I'll go ahead and finish this acorn up. Working on this particular little one, it only has this little tiny bit of applique in it for the bee. And on this one, we're using those long fly stitches to do the petals, just like on the other block that we did, and satin stitches for the bee's stripes, and the bee's wings are back stitches. So we've gone over all of those stitches. I just wanted to point out here, these two branches are tied together. And so they're supposed to be like a little bow. And the way to do the bows is by just using a simple little lazy daisy stitch. So you start at the base, you wrap your thread around and put your needle back in the base, and then up at the tip of the little loop or the bow, the thread goes under the needle and there's a little bow. We'll tack it down on the other side of the loop. And I'll do the other side. And that's a cute way to just do if you need to make a little bow, it's a pretty simple way to do it. Because again, that would be just too small to actually try to stem stitch that little guy. So there, now that one's all done. On this little block, we have a bee. So satin stitch the little stripes, back stitch the wings. We did the lazy daisy stitches for the flowers. And there's a couple things I wanted to show you on this block. One is at the base of this beehive stand. These are just cross stitches. So you're going to start at one corner, go down to the base, just go straight up to the next stitch. So we're going to do all of the cross in one direction first, and then go back and do the crosses in the other direction. So now we have all of one direction done. We're going to go back and work the other direction. So same thing, start in the corner, cross over, go back up, and just continue on until the base is done. And that's just a really simple cross stitch. Now the base is finished. There are several different house patterns in this book, and I wanted to show you how I do the windows. Since they're so tiny, instead of trying to do a stem stitch, I just take each pane as an individual little stitch. So I'll start in the corner, go to the center, and I come up at the next corner, kind of do a little back stitch, and work my way around the window. So each little pane is its own individual little stitch. So there's a finished window. And then in the roof line, these are just simple running stitches. I try to keep my stitches fairly even. But as you can see, that doesn't always pan out, but it's okay. Makes it look like it's hand stitched rather than a machine. Now the smoke coming out of the chimney is a back stitch. I'll just review that again. You're going to start at the chimney, take 1/8 of an inch and another 1/8 of an inch, go back in that same hole as the first stitch, and you're going to skip over where your thread came out about 1/8 of an inch, and keep working backwards and then forward. And if it doesn't look perfectly straight, that's okay, because it's smoke, and smoke tends to have a little more organic shape to it. I did want to also show you how to do a fishbone stitch, which is one of the ways that you can fill those leaves in instead of just an outline. That looks better, I think, personally, if you're using a variegated thread or a color of thread rather than just black. So what you'll do is you'll start at the point of the leaf that's away from the stem. I usually come down about 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. If it's a tiny leaf, I'll take it all the way to the end, but this is a bigger leaf. So I'm just going to take it 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to bring my needle up right on the line on one side of that initial stitch. Now I'm going to cross over that center line, and I'm going to come up on the other side, right on that line. Now I'm going to cross again to this side and come down a few threads and go up on the line. So we're just going to continually be working back and forth, crossing over that center line. So now I'm just going to come straight over and up. Down and up. The threads are going to be very close together when you're coming up along the lines, just like you would a satin stitch. This is also a stitch with this big of a leaf. It probably would be easier in a hoop, but I didn't have my hoop available, so I'm just going to make do. Now you can start to see some of that color variation. This is a Valdani 12 weight pearl cotton, one of their variegated threads that are so lovely. And if you need to on one side like this, I can still see that line a little bit. So I'm just going to take one more little stitch on this side and just take it down to the center. And that is a fishbone stitch.